Welcome to the 21st part of Spring Boot Kubernetes tutorial series. In this video, we are going to learn how to use Kubernetes config maps and secrets. In the previous video, we have seen how to create pods and then deployments, and then we have prepared two YAML definition files for our Postgres database and for our bookmarker backend API. However, if you notice in our Postgres database deployment configuration, we have hard-coded these values for Postgres username and password and also the Postgres database name. We have hard-coded these values. And we also need to configure these values once we integrate our bookmarker API with Postgres database. We need to provide the same details to our Spring Boot application database configuration values as well. So instead of duplicating this data, which will be harder to maintain over the time, we can use config maps and secrets to configure these values and then reference those values from this configuration. So we are going to learn how to do that in this video. Let us see how we can create a config map with few configuration properties. So earlier we have seen how to create the deployment using kubectl create command. So we can use a similar command like kubectl create config map and the name of the config map. And there are several ways you can create a config map. Like this, you can use from literal, where you can specify what is the key and what is the value, and you can provide one or more of these key value pairs. And here you can run this command and it says config map db config is created. So if you go to lens and if you check under the config section, there is config maps. You can see here there is db config, and if you click it, you can see there is db host whose value is Postgres and db name whose value is appdb. There are two entries in this one. They are nothing but what we have entered here. Okay, this is one approach to create a config map. And similarly, you can also use from file, from env file. So you can have these key value pairs in a file, and then you can use that file and then create the config map. Okay, so you can pick whatever approach suits for you. And let us delete this kubectl delete. You can type config map or cm in short and specify db config. So that is deleted. We can check it here. So it is gone. So again, as you create config maps using these ad hoc commands, you can also do the same thing using YAML config manifest file. Okay, so we can follow the same approach. Like we have this command, instead of directly running it, we can use dry run equals to client and output to YAML file, and then pipe it to, let's say, one-config.yaml. Okay, cool. Now if I go to this, and then we have this config.yaml file, and here we can see, let us clean this up a little bit and move it to config metadata to beginning. Okay, so this is the format we can create for creating a config map. Okay, let us change it to bookmarker config, and then here let us use Postgres host Postgres database. Let us name it as db name, and let us put another couple of things like username, password. So here, these two are, I would consider as sensitive data, which we are not supposed to use with config maps. But later, when we look at how to use secrets, we will move these two properties into secrets. For now, let us configure these values. And here, I would give the name for all of these to Postgres for everything. And for database name, let us name it as appdb. Okay, host name, anyway, that is going to change once we introduce Postgres services. For now, let us leave it to Postgres. Okay, so we have defined an object of type config map, and we gave the name bookmarker config, and we specified under data, we have specified key value pairs. Okay, so this is how we can create a config map with a few properties in it. Let us apply. We can apply this in the same way. kubectl apply -f. Let us apply it to config. So it is created. Now let us check here, and we can see these properties appearing here. Okay, then how do we reference these values instead of hard coding? First, let us rename these file names. We have one config. There is no need to prefix with 1, 2, 3 like that, but I would like to see some ordering. Okay. Okay, so there is no guarantee that it is going to apply in the same config, but I'd like to see some ordering in the names. Okay, now I'm opening this Postgres DB YAML file, and here, instead of directly giving the value as Postgres, what I would like to do, value from, and then specify config map key reference, and here I would specify Postgres username, and name is this config map name. So here, instead of giving the value directly, the hard-coded value, we are referencing using value from, and then we are referencing a key value from one of the config map. So config map key ref, and I am giving the name as bookmarker config, which is nothing but this one, and then I am specifying use Postgres username key, and take this value and assign it to this as an environment variable. So we can do the same thing for other properties as well. Okay, here it is supposed to be password, and here it is DB name. Okay, so basically these username and password are kind of a credentials. I would not use Kubernetes config maps for this purpose. We would be using secrets, but for now let us see how we can use config map key value pairs here. Okay, we have these values, and let us also specify port. (5432). We won't be using these two properties for Postgres, but we are going to use these values while referencing in our bookmarker API when we discuss about how to use services. Okay, so here we have these properties. Now, if you remember, in one of our previous video, we have seen how to apply all the files in a particular directory. Here we are going to use kubectl apply -f, and I want to apply in the current directory. So it applied all the three files. Okay, and here we can see there is bookmarker config with all these properties here, and then we can see both the API part and then deployment Postgres. We can see both of these two parts running. Okay, and if you click on this Postgres part, you can see here under environment section we have specified Postgres DB, Postgres password, and Postgres user. So these values are referenced from the config maps and then pass these values as environment variables. That's how you can reference values from config maps. So if you take a look at our backend API configuration file, Spring Boot configuration file, application.properties, we have a couple of properties file. One is the default profile and then another one is a local profile. Okay. So basically, if you want to have a different profile and then you want to have a profile specific properties file, this is one of the approach. Like you can create a separate file with a name pattern as application hyphen profile name dot properties or YAML file. In the recent version of Spring Boot, there is another approach supported for properties as well. So here, instead of creating, let's say we want to have a configuration that is specific for Kubernetes environment. So in that case, one approach is you can create application hyphen k8s.properties or whatever the name you want to give, or you can follow a multi-document approach. If you go to Spring Boot documentation, there is external application property section under which there is working with multi-document files. So instead of creating entirely a separate file, what you can do, you can have all the default properties in the beginning, and then you can have this separator of hash 3 hyphens, and then you can specify spring config activate on profile, and you can specify what are the profile you want it to be active for this, and then you can specify the overridden properties or new properties. So we can follow same pattern here, and let us say I want to have hash. So this is the separator between different profiles, and then I have spring config active on profile k8s, which means these properties will override any default properties if we activate k8s profile. So here, when I am running on Kubernetes, I want to point to the database running in Postgres, and here is some notation like by default it will be usually JDBC Postgres host name, port number, like this. What we can do, instead of hard coding those values, we can specify this parameter property placeholder and then specify a default value. So how it works, if you provide any db underscore host environment variable value, that is going to be used, but if you don't pass any, it's going to use this default value. So why we want to use this approach? Because instead of overriding this entire value while configuring your API environment variable, what I would like to do is simply I would be able to pass these environment variables and then point to a different database. So I can configure db host, db port, db database, db username and password as environment variables. I don't have to override the entire thing. Okay. So this is how we can configure for a different profile, and it is up to you. Like you can create entirely a new file with application hyphen k8s.properties and put only these values, or you can use the same file and then separate it with a separator, profile separator with this, and then configure this. Now coming back to our bookmarker API, and here we already specified to activate Kubernetes profile, which means if you bundle this and then let's say if you deploy this image and then if you activate this K8s profile, it's going to try to use these properties and try to connect to the database. So for this we need to provide these environment variables, right? So let us do that. Okay, so here again we did the same for our bookmarker API. Instead of hard coding those values, we are giving direct value to enable Kubernetes profile name here, and also we provide environment variables for DB host, DB port, database name, and username and password. Instead of hard coding those values, we are referencing config map key value. Okay, so this is how you can centralize all your configuration in one place, and then you can reference those values from both Postgres database definition and also your API, so that if you have to change anywhere, you can do that at one place. Okay. But as of now, we are not going to use these values because currently we cannot reference the host as um, Postgres, because we have not yet exposed this Postgres database as a service so that our API can reference it. So right now I'm going to comment out this entire part, but this is how we can do it. We can comment this part, but so now that we know how to use config maps for configuring non-sensitive data, let us take a look at how we can create sensitive configuration properties using secrets. Creating secrets is very similar to config maps. So we can see, we can create kubectl create secret, and you can specify the type of secret. Here there are a number of types of secrets we can create, but what we are interested is in creating a generic secret. And then you can specify the secret name. Here let us name it as bookmarker secrets. Okay, and here you can use the same approach, like you can specify from literal and specify Postgres username equals to, and you can specify this value as Postgres, and you can specify a number of literals you want, and let us use the dry run approach, and client, and the output format is YAML. So instead of writing to a file, let us print it in the console. So here let us copy this, and 3 hyphens is a separator in config files, ML config files. So here we don't need this creation timestamp, and move this to here. So in the same file we can put multiple types of Kubernetes objects with this separator. Okay, and here if you see, most of the things are same, except that the kind is secret. Here it is config map, and the data, here we have specified Postgres username as Postgres, but it automatically convert that into base 64 encoded format and put it here. So if you want to write secrets in this file, you need to use base 64 encoded format instead of putting the plain text value here. But if you go to Kubernetes documentation and secret section, you can see this caution here, like Kubernetes secrets are by default stored in unencrypted format, and also these are not really secure. Here this is a plain base 64 encoded value, which you can decode in any online tool. Decode, you can get the actual value. So you would need to take extra precautions. Here they mentioned what are the approaches you can take, like using encryption at rest, and then enabling role-based access controls. So you need to be cautious while using these secrets. And also you need to specify what type of secret it is. So here you can see there are a number of types of secrets, but what we used is generic, which is nothing but this opaque type of secret. So if you see here, you can see type, you can mention it like this. Okay, and in the same way, let us move these two things from here to, I would consider both Postgres username and password as sensitive data, and I have moved it. So here, instead of using Postgres, I would use the encrypted base 64 encoded values. Okay, and once we move this from config map to this one, we need to update values accordingly. So here it is no more coming from config map, it is coming from secret key ref, and then this is bookmarker secrets. Okay, and same is the case for password, and it is from bookmarker secrets, and these values are from config only. And for bookmarker API as well, here we can see it is secret key ref and bookmarker secrets. Okay, this is how you can use both config maps and secrets to reference and then mount them as environment variables for any pods. Cool. So now let us apply these changes. So now if you go and see config maps, we have this config map and we can see these values here. And now if you go to secrets, here you can see bookmark secrets, and then by default they are showing as base 64 encoded format. And if you click on this show icon, you can see the actual value from Pens tool. Okay, and also if you go to pods and then check for Postgres pod, here you can see environment variable Postgres DB, Postgres password. You can see it came from secret key reference, and then you can click on this button to show the actual value. Okay, so that is how you can use both config maps and secrets to provide the configuration data to your pods. So currently, if you take a look at our Postgres deployment definition, here we are simply specifying the container to use Postgres image, and then we provide only Postgres user, password, and database name. And by default, all the data, whatever we are going to store in the Postgres database, is going to be stored within the container itself, which means if we delete the container, its data is also gone. But as we discussed in the previous videos, we need to always make sure that data persists across the pod lifecycle. Data is more crucial than these containers. So in the next video, we are going to see how we can use persistence volumes, which are similar to Docker volumes, to persist the data so that it retains across pods, restarts, and then we will see how we can use persistence volumes, and then how we can use persistence volumes to attach it to a pod. Okay, so that's it for this video, and thanks for watching, and stay tuned for the upcoming videos. Bye bye.